The Crimean chaos continues. As massive fireballs engulfed the Kerch Strait, Russia realized that Ukraine was taking aim at Crimea's power facilities. Russia may have realized, but it could do nothing about it. Occupiers have been plunged into darkness as Kerch goes pitch black. Frankly, those occupiers are getting used to this. Darkness, fuel shortages, and a constant message sent by Ukraine that the only route out of Crimea is a target have become the norm, as Putin can do nothing to protect the peninsula that is supposed to be Russia's stronghold. Get out now is the message that Ukraine is sending to the Russians in Crimea. Something big is coming, and you don't want to be living your illegal life in Crimea when it arrives. As gunfire and explosions rocked the occupied region of Kerch, Russian authorities started to panic, and they should. After days of attacking shipping in the Sea of Azov, and those strikes haven't stopped, Ukraine took aim at power facilities in one region that can serve as an escape route for the hundreds of thousands of Russian occupiers who have made Crimea their home. The Kyiv Post has the basic details in a July 15th report where it says that total blackouts were reported all across Kerch on the day of its report. That isn't based on Ukraine trumpeting its results either. The puppet head of the Kerch administration, Ivan Koshel, was the bearer of bad news for his people as he reported, "Unfortunately, as a result of the enemy drone attack, Kerch is completely without power. Life support systems are operating on backup power sources. All city services are involved in emergency recovery operations." Completely without power. If there's one thing the great protector Putin was supposed to be able to do, it was to prevent Ukraine from ever inflicting something like this on the Russians, who he told to move to Crimea. The Crimean Wind Telegram channel documented the panicked Russian response to Ukraine's attack. It said that subscribers to the channel who are on the ground in Kerch reported that loud blasts could be heard rocking this key region of the peninsula. Russia, having spent months getting its more advanced air defense systems blasted by Ukrainian drones, seemed to be able to do little more than deploy mobile fire groups in a hit-and-hope strategy that failed to stop the attacks on Kerch's power facilities. Amidst it all, Russia also tried to stop a propaganda nightmare from unfolding. The same Telegram channel says that Russia halted all traffic across the Kerch Bridge. Why? Did Russia fear that Ukraine would finally take out the Kerch Bridge? Or did Putin want to make sure that no Crimean occupiers could get out and into mainland Russia to tell others what's really happening on a peninsula that is supposed to be a Russian fortress? Whatever Russia was trying to do, none of it helped. In addition to Kerch, power outages were reported in several settlements in Crimea's northwestern and eastern districts, the New Voice of Ukraine reports. Repair crews were already on site, the outlet says, though it's impossible to determine when they'll be able to get their power flowing again. And even if they do, Ukraine always has more drones on hand to take out repaired substations and other infrastructure. And as if all of this wasn't bad enough for the Kerch occupiers, the Russian-controlled water company that services the Crimean Peninsula, Voda Crimea, reported that the water pressure had been reduced in 9 districts, all as a result of the emergency affecting Kerch's power grid. No electricity, no water, no fuel, no hope. That's what Ukraine has transformed life into for many occupiers who bought into Putin's claims that Crimea would become a luxury destination that could never fall out of Russian control. And through it all, Ukraine hasn't attacked civilians directly. It just sends the message, over and over, "We will make your life hell until you figure out that it's time to leave Crimea forever." Of course, anybody who gets their Ukraine war updates from Russia's defense ministry wouldn't have a clue about any of this. As the puppet regime in Crimea panicked so much that it actually delivered some semblance of truth to its people, the Russian defense ministry did what it always does: ignore Ukraine's success and act as though Russia's air defenses are doing their jobs. The ministry claimed that Russian air defenses shot down 93 Ukrainian drones on the night when Ukraine crippled Kerch's power supply. The downing of drones was reported over Crimea, as well as both the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, and several Russian border regions, including Kursk, Bryansk, Rostov, and Belgorod. Head meets sand. Russia claims a successful defense as Ukraine's drones cause chaos in Crimea. The defense ministry may not have wanted to mention the inconvenient truth of blackouts rolling all over one of the most important regions in Crimea, but those living there didn't need the ministry to tell the truth. They need Russia to stop what is happening all over Crimea right now, especially when it comes to Ukraine's targeting of power facilities. You see, what just happened in Kerch isn't a one-off. There's a bigger picture at play here. Ukraine has been targeting the Crimean energy grid for weeks, with the full campaign kicking off in late June and early July, the Kyiv Post reports. Ukraine has followed the same blueprint that it has in place for taking out Russian oil refineries. It strikes once, then follows up a short while later, and then Ukraine repeats the strikes, rendering repair work moot. We saw that at the Simferopol combined cycle thermal power plant, where Ukraine's strike drones hit their marks in 3 separate air raids conducted between June 20th and June 25th. Those attacks kicked off a wave of strikes, most of which target power stations that are nodes in a massive network that keeps electricity flowing to the residents of Crimea. Strikes on the energy grid, along with rolling blackouts all over Crimea, have simply become a feature of life for the occupiers who were told that they were moving to the Russian equivalent of the Riviera after Putin's illegal 2014 takeover. Even July 15th brought with it more pain. As Kerch grappled with darkness, Ukraine's drones also attacked the Balaclava thermal power station in Sevastopol, which is another repeat target. Ukraine's Special Operations Forces report that it had help from a resistance movement on the ground for this operation, which took out the plant's machine hall and likely damaged the cooling system used by one of the Siemens SGT-5 2000E turbines in that machine hall. Siemens is a German company. Germany is one of many nations that have imposed sanctions on Russia. If a piece of equipment Siemens made that keeps the power flowing in Crimea is destroyed, Russia is going to have a very difficult time sourcing the parts it needs for repairs. The SOF says as much, claiming that this single strike, which impacted a plant that the Kyiv Independent reports supplies as much as 50% of the electricity used in Crimea, has caused enough damage to require between 2 and 5 months of repair work. And that's the point. Strike precisely, and Russia ends up with major problems on its hands. These strikes have been having the exact effect that Ukraine intends. In the wake of the Simferopol plant strikes, Crimea's puppet government was forced to declare a state of emergency in Sevastopol. Don't underestimate how important this is on both the morale and propaganda fronts. Crimea is supposed to be Russia's fortress, the crown jewel that represents Russian dominance over Ukraine, and if Putin had his way, the first step on the road to complete annexation of Ukraine's territory. Through Crimea, the entire Russian invasion into Ukraine's east and south was meant to flow, and it did for a while. But now there is panic on the peninsula as the power goes out, fuel runs short, and Ukraine's drones just keep on coming. Ukraine can crow about the strikes, but the real damage is being done to Putin and his self-made image as the protector of the Russian people. It's not just Kerch and Sevastopol that are dealing with blackouts and panicked puppet governors either. On July 13th, UKR Inform revealed that blackouts in the Zhankoy district of Crimea have been ongoing for an entire week up till that point. Ukraine's strategy isn't just hurting Russian occupiers. As the chairman of the Mejlis of the Crimean Tatar people, Refat Chabarov, explains, those who support Ukraine's cause are also being impacted. However, Chabarov said that this is a hardship that must be endured, as the ultimate goal is to liberate Crimea so that life will become better for all those who have lived under Russian oppression since 2014. We sincerely sympathize with all the residents of Crimea who are awaiting the liberation of the peninsula from the Russian barbarians and are forced to endure new hardships caused by the Russian occupation. We thank them for not losing hope and remaining loyal to Ukraine despite all the difficulties and repression, Chabarov said in a message designed to encourage those who support Ukraine to hold the fort. You can get through this, and there is an ever-widening light at the end of the tunnel. In the meantime, the Kerch strikes that have led to yet more blackouts are all designed to undermine Russia. The controlling power in Crimea has lost its control. As the SOF puts it, striking power generation facilities on the Crimean bridgehead significantly undermines the Russian Federation's army's offensive and defensive capabilities, reduces its operational tempo and the resilience of its logistical support. So as the occupiers fear for their futures in the dark, soldiers on the front lines in mainland Ukraine are being forced into assaults despite not having the support they need. That support won't come. The supplies and soldiers are locked in Crimea and they are disappearing by the day. That's a real problem for Putin. But behind that problem lies another issue. We touched on it earlier. The location of Ukraine's latest power-cutting strikes is very important. But before we explain why, this is a reminder that you're watching The Military Show. If you're getting insight from the channel, hit subscribe and enable notifications so you see what we have coming next. Kerch isn't just any old region in Crimea. It's one of the single most important regions on the peninsula for the simple fact that Kerch and the bridge that connects Kerch to the Russian mainland is the only route that most of the occupiers have in or out of the peninsula. Every time that Ukraine launches an attack in Kerch, no matter what is targeted, the nation sends the message that the only bridge out could be a target whenever Ukraine chooses. It has been before, of course. But now Ukraine has the firepower, and Russia's defenses are so poor that isolated strikes against the bridge would evolve into a campaign that takes the bridge out forever. If that happens, the occupiers will be trapped in the hell that their leader's failure has created. Ukraine is being very purposeful with attacking everything in Kerch except the Kerch bridge. The commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces, Robert Brovdy, made that very clear on July 14th, just ahead of the attacks that plunged the illegal residents of Kerch into darkness. "There's no fuel in Crimea, and I want to tell you there won't be any," Brovdy exclaimed, adding, "We're cutting off the access routes, not the exit routes. We're not touching the Kerch bridge. Let them go through it. Let those millions leave through that little bridge back to their Russia and travel somewhere far beyond the Urals to live in peace." Brovdy and Ukraine know exactly what they're doing here. The warning is one thing. The occupiers in Crimea would do well to heed it. But what Ukraine really wants to create here is the sight of thousands upon thousands of occupiers desperately attempting to escape via the Kerch bridge. We talked about propaganda victories before. This would be a big one. Nothing would damage Putin's casting of himself as the strongman protector of Russia more than his own people running for their lives from Crimea. And don't forget, those people have to go somewhere. They will become refugees in a war that was never meant to touch Russia. More damage to Putin's reputation would result, and those running away from Crimea would have all the stories to tell of non-stop drone attacks, fuel shortages, power cuts, and the utter failure of Russia's defenses to protect them. And if that can happen to them, it can happen anywhere in Russia, will be the message they bring. It's pressure on Putin. The war is being brought home to Russia. Ukraine is keeping up the pressure. On July 17th, the Kyiv Post reported that Ukraine has scored another successful strike in Kerch, this time against a rail hub in the region that is part of Russia's Crimean logistical network. That strike caused a fire at the rail hub, which is located close to the Kerch bridge. Again, the message is sent. The fires are creeping closer. So are the strikes. Get out now, or the bridge itself will become a target. None of this is going to stop. Some may question the morality of what Ukraine is doing, but it's worth repeating that Ukraine isn't striking civilians directly. That's a move out of Putin's playbook, not Ukraine's. Rather, Ukraine is exposing the fact that Putin's selling of Crimea as a luxury destination to the Russian people is an attempt to hide the fact that Russia has turned Crimea into a massive military base used to attack Ukraine. Nothing more than a veneer of legitimacy wiped over another tool of aggression. Ukraine's now former defense minister Mikhailo Fedorov makes that point, noting, "Crimea has essentially turned into a military base for the Russians, allowing them to continue occupying the south of our country and transfer forces to the east." This is vital to understand when considering why Ukraine is targeting Crimea as it is right now. The peninsula isn't some innocent territory that is being subjected to fuel shortages and rolling blackouts. Sure, hundreds of thousands of Russian occupiers are feeling the pain, but never forget that Crimea was used as a launching pad for the initial invasion of Ukraine. Russia is still trying to use it as a logistical node to feed supplies into the Ukrainian mainland, and there are estimated to be around 50,000 soldiers on the peninsula. There is nothing innocent about Russia's occupation of Crimea. Ukraine has exposed that fact, and it's going to keep pushing the advantage that it's carved out for itself. What we've just seen in Kerch is part of a much wider campaign, and Ukraine is making it clear that something big is coming for Crimea that Russia can't handle. You can argue that something big has already arrived. Al Jazeera reports that the fruits of Ukraine's multi-month labor to isolate Crimea have already grown. Ukraine essentially has fire control over the peninsula, the outlet says, which allows Ukraine to plunge Crimea deeper and deeper into the power and fuel crises that are already there. The puppet authorities can't do anything about it. Even as Putin tries, and often fails, to send help from Moscow, those authorities can't even get at a schedule for a return to normality. What Crimea has now is the new normal. And beyond attacks on Crimea itself, Ukraine is exacerbating the issues that it's created by striking ships in the waters around Crimea. The shadow fleet that keeps Crimea alive is sinking. By July 13th, a non-stop wave of daily attacks against Shadow Fleet oil tankers, supply ships, and ferries that Russia is using to transport supplies had resulted in movement through the Kerch Strait practically stopping, claims Brovdy. By July 16th, Ukraine had struck 147 tankers in the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea, 117 of which were feeder tankers that deliver fuel to Crimea. Those attacks add to a logistical lockdown campaign on the Ukrainian mainland against the roads, bridges, and trucks that bring supplies and fuel into Crimea via overland routes. The fuel has run dry at gas stations, and the blackouts are getting longer and covering more of Crimea than ever before. And all of this leaves Putin with a twofold problem. First, the Crimean stronghold has become one of Russia's biggest vulnerabilities. The power cuts in Kerch are just a symptom of a disease that is withering Crimea. Mass militarization and economic integration with the Russian mainland gave the false impression that Crimea was invulnerable. But now it's a money pit for Russia. All that Putin can do is keep trying to send fuel, soldiers, and equipment into the peninsula. Once those supplies arrive, if they arrive at all, they're isolated. Ukraine hits them. Russia spends more money sending supplies over. Ukraine hits them again. Billions are being poured into Crimea, and it's still the single most vulnerable occupied region of Ukraine. A war that started with Crimea is going to end with the peninsula. And for Putin, the second of his problems lies with his credibility. We've touched on this already. Putin is supposed to be the great protector. Since 2014, he has told Russians that they own Crimea and that Ukraine can do nothing about it. He has been proven a liar by everything we're seeing now in Kerch and elsewhere in and around the peninsula. As Jason Corcoran put it in a July 16th opinion piece for the Moscow Times, Ukraine appears to have recognized something that the West initially missed. It doesn't necessarily have to liberate Crimea tomorrow to weaken Putin. If it can steadily increase the military and economic cost of holding the peninsula while destroying its appeal as Russia's showcase resort, Crimea ceases to be an asset and becomes a liability. Every fuel shortage, cancelled holiday, and damaged depot chips away at the image Putin sold to Russians in 2014. And that's the whole point. The occupiers who can do nothing but watch as the blackouts roll over and the pumps run dry have been sold a fake bill of goods. They now see through the lies that Putin told them, even if they wouldn't ever admit it publicly for fear of retaliation, but it can't be denied. Crimea was supposed to be the jewel in Putin's crown. It's now become a noose around the Russian leader's neck, and he can't yank that noose off without revealing Russia's true weakness. As for Kerch, the power is out, and the strikes keep coming. But the bridge still stands, for as long as Ukraine allows it. How long Ukraine will give the occupiers their escape route is now the big question. Putin's symbolism only holds so much power. Blocking the Kerch bridge, as Russia did in the wake of the Kerch strikes, will only create more anger. Chaos is upon Crimea, and that chaos is key to liberation. We've covered one strike and provided analysis on Ukraine's strategy in this video, but to get a true taste of what the occupiers in Crimea are dealing with, you need more. A lot more, and we have it in this compilation video, where we expose the true scale of Putin's Crimean catastrophe. Watch that video today to see how Crimea is crumbling, and then subscribe to The Military Show so you don't miss any of our daily coverage of the latest developments in the Ukraine war. And thank you for watching.